As always, very gonna be. Get twisted on my word. Hello, we are back again.
After, in real life.
Yeah, in real life together. Very exciting. It's been a little while because of events everyone is all too aware of. So we're here to talk about the Women's Prize shortlist in preparation for the winner being announced on September 9th and what we think might win or what we hope will win or predict will win, but also mainly just to talk about these 6 books, which is going to be really interesting because I think we have some very different opinions about
More
some
so
of them.
More so than usual. I think we often overlap quite a lot, but have sort of. But I know that there's books that we don't agree on because you saw some of my tweets on my alt Twitter account.
As always, we're going to be very interested in your opinions as well, but I think even more so now because we're going to be very opinionated about some of these books. We've had more time than usual to read all of the shortlist, which is kind of nice in a way.
And
not
a
to
long
have
page count this year.
Yeah, with somebody in particular adding to the page lengths. I think a lot of people have really enjoyed having extra time to go through the shortlist. And we've both also read the entire shortlist, which I think doesn't always, it usually happens, doesn't it?
In the past couple of years, I've been a bit more disciplined about it. I think we've got a good hit rate, and we have no excuses. Although we were saying that we both were a bit like, when they changed the date to September, like, we've got ages to read them, and then we both were reading them, literally finishing the last one this week.
Yeah, I read 2 in the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, me too.
So it's just,
I had all these intentions of rereading the ones I'd already read, and I have not done that.
Yeah, I've not reread any of them either, but like, it's always so difficult with rereading, isn't it? Because, it's like, you don't know whether to prioritize like new books, but even though I always know when I do reread something, I get so much more out of it, but it's hard to lodge that in your mind when you're thinking like, but there's this really interesting new book that I want to read. Okay, so we're going to go through all of them in alphabetical order and discuss them. And and we were saying we haven't really discussed in depth most of these books. We've talked about a couple of them in our sort of predictions video. So the very first one is it's going to be an interesting conversation. Dominicana by Angie Cruz. Which we both read recently, and I don't know. Do you want to go first, or should I go?
So I didn't like it. This was the only one on the shortlist that I didn't like really at all.
And I wasn't sure if you were going to come around to it because when I last heard your opinion on it, you were like 1/3 of the way through it. So I thought maybe she'll change your mind.
Well, I did prefer the second half to the first half, definitely. I didn't like the writing style. That was my main issue. I didn't think the present tense worked, and I found it frustrating. I just didn't like the style. I found it quite like simplistic and stilted. I didn't like the present tense. I didn't like the short sentences. It just meant that I just wasn't emotionally engaged. The writing style just didn't work for me. I did have some frustrations as well with, I didn't know if she was going for more of like a fable feel, because I did feel like a lot of stuff just happened. We were like told it happened, but I didn't really feel like we'd been given enough like build up to like kind of really understand why some of those things were happening. I found it frustrating. Like spoilers, like when it's not a spoiler, it says it on the cover copy, but it's like halfway through the book. But when she tries to leave her husband, she's like so upset, and she's been physically abused, and then the brother comes and she's just like starts flirting with him, and then she goes back, and I didn't really feel like I had any understanding of her, even though it's present tense and it's her POV. Like I didn't really feel like I had a nuanced understanding of how she was feeling and why she acted certain ways a lot of the time. I like with that love, like we're told it's like this grand love affair, but like I didn't really feel like I didn't feel like it had been earned to feel like invested in that. Like I didn't really see on the page kind of enough that I believed that or understood why she was in love with him. I really didn't like the present tense. I think present tense is a hard one to pull off. And I think that if you also have to sometimes slip into it's present tense first person, but sometimes you just get random chapters where it's other characters doing things because the character wouldn't see it, but it's not enough that it's like It's like, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it in present tense. Like, I found that frustrating.
But sort of mixing styles. And
like, I found elements of it very interesting, but I almost felt like it was almost, like fable-like. Like, it read like a fairy tale. Like, it was like big stereotypes, kind of very broadly drawn characters that were kind of like what the book was saying was almost like the characters were just sort of ciphers to say those things. They didn't feel very real. It's very like tell not show. Like, we're told how she says she's feeling these ways, but I didn't really feel that I was getting the showing. I just was told that that's how she felt, and I didn't find it convincing. And a lot of the like philosophizing was just like very on the surface, like a lot of very like straightforward metaphors, and it just didn't work for me at all. I did get into it. I found it readable.
It's
very easy to read and the short chapters, and the second half I sort of felt like it found its footing a bit more, but it didn't work for me.
Okay.
But you liked it more. You liked it more than me.
I had the complete opposite experience. Whereas, and no, it's just like listening to that and trying to like process like so why did it work? Because I did feel really invested in her character and just felt sort of emotionally attached to her. So was really caught up in her peril and the ups and downs of her feelings. And so I'm not really sure why. I mean, maybe it's partly because I do have to say, like, I read this on audiobook, and so I was listening to it, so I don't know if that swayed my experience of it, where it just felt more conversational and breezy.
That's really interesting.
So I just took it in that way. So maybe if I read it on the page, I would have a slightly different experience. But yeah, I just really felt the peril of her character in this situation that she was forced into, and think how she was only 14 years old, wasn't she, when she gets married to him? So like this very young girl, sort of forced into this situation in a marriage, and then to move to another country which she didn't necessarily want to go to, but that there was all this family pressure and the pressure from him to get married, and how he was also pressured in certain ways. And so I felt like she was able to build this picture of this relationship that, because of the circumstances, they were sort of forced into this situation that naturally, I mean, not to like justify his action and his like abuse, because he's a really
awful,
horrible man in a lot of ways, but I also did appreciate how she would sort of go into his perspective a little bit, or tell his tale a little bit, to show that that he had these pressures upon himself from his family and as an immigrant to America. But that just gave a slightly more well-rounded view than if it was just in her perspective. But also because she is such a young girl, and I just enjoyed following her journey in this sort of realization, coming to terms with what she actually wants in her life, because she hadn't had the chance to vocalize that at any point, because she was so young. And so I got caught up in that whole aspect of the story, and I did I did sort of believe the like the romance and like the sexiness of the whole relationship, and how that developed over time with the brother. And with his brother, I should say, if you haven't read it, this isn't like that would be a very different story. But
crucially not, and it is not a book about incest.
Explaining this so well. But also, like, I think slightly selfishly, part of the reason why I responded to this story so well, and this is totally just my own natural interest in things. I love stories about people who have taken entrepreneurial role where they start a like food business, or like a catering business, or start like a restaurant or a bakery or something. I'm just like totally with that character.
That was my favorite bit. That was my favorite bit, and I'd have loved to have like more of that. I did enjoy that element. I think, and I see all of that to a point, in the sense that I was reading it and I felt like I felt like the way it was told, the writing style basically just was a big block for me to be able to emotionally engage with it, just because through personal taste, I guess, because it obviously worked for you, it just didn't like the way that the book was written, and that then sort of stopped me really being able to kind of emotionally engage with.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I couldn't get over being frustrated by the way it was written, and every time like I'd start getting into the story, there'd be a sentence that just made me really cross, and I'd have to like text my friend about it. I'm totally aware that if it works for some people, then it's not, there's a huge element of personal taste. But
I also know you're not alone in your opinions, because I was going through reading some other reviews, and other people have been criticizing the way it's written.
It just didn't work for me, and it stopped me really being able to, every time I got invested, I'd read a sentence that I was just like, maybe cross, but it sounds so ridiculous, but it didn't work at all for me. I didn't like it, because to start with I was like, she's very young and she's very naive, and maybe that quite like childlike approach to things is a character choice, and perhaps it is, but it still meant that it stopped me kind of engaging with it. She reacts quite straightforwardly to a lot of what's happening to her, which I think arguably fits with the background and the age of the character,
but also how she processes her experiences is very childlike, because like watching TV programs like I Love Lucy, and then she starts imagining her and her husband in this kind of sitcom type scenario.
I thought that was a really interesting
or
facet, but I guess I wish it had just been a bit more. I felt like it was a bit jolty, the experience. Like I quite liked those elements, but they were only used sort of like a couple of times.
Yeah.
I think it would have been interesting to kind of lean into that and do that a bit more, because I think she would have been able to sort of basically the character, not me, Anna, the character's voice, and because it was so first person, the character's voice was just a complete barrier for me. And I actually think that even though I was frustrated when some bits of like that you suddenly get glimpses of what somebody else is doing, because you have to know what the characters are doing, and I did find that a bit frustrating because it just suddenly leaps into a different thing. And again, I kind of wish it had been done more though. I was like, I think if it had been like Anna's voice maybe interspersed more regularly in a more felt like more of a structured way, interspersed with third person sections, or these kind of sections where she goes and kind of uses the pop culture that she's, or the newspaper reports that she's like, I think I would have enjoyed it more if it had really embraced those different ways of telling the story and done that in a bit more of a structured way, and Anna's voice was like one of the ways that we're hearing the story, but because it's almost entirely Anna's voice, present tense, it just didn't connect. Even though she's called Anna, which usually means I like immediately
I thought you would naturally have an empathy for her.
And I did have an empathy, but it felt like a very what you want when you read fiction is you do want to feel like the characters are real, and I guess I never felt like I was reading about real people, and I understand it's fiction and they're not, but although it's inspired by her mother's life, isn't it? But I just always felt like I was reading about it in quite like an objective way, almost like reading a synopsis of a novel. Like it's just like, this is what happened. Yeah, so it didn't work for me. Although I did predict right from the very beginning, didn't I? This was on my predictions list.
It was, yeah.
I read it and then I don't like it. So,
but yeah, as Anna pointed out, before we started this, all 6 books we mentioned in our predictions list. So
Smuggy McSmuggersons over here. But we did. Which is always pleasing.
Well, I'm very glad it was on the list. I'm very glad I felt fully involved in it. And I loved the whole World's Fair bit too. I thought that was like such a great fantastic scene.
All the bits with the food I really did enjoy, and I really like reading about a lot. I really enjoyed the bits where she's talking about what she's cooking, and I felt there was like a warmth.
Except for the pigeon.
Yes, poor, was it Betty the pigeon? Yes.
But yeah, all the other cooking bits are
the food bit was great. I'm not like mad, like I wouldn't have shortlisted it, but like I think it's the only book I didn't like. It's not one like, what was that one that we both was First Love, yes. I feel like that was the one where we both like viscerally hated. I'm not in that territory, even though I didn't like it at all.
Good. Definitely let us know what you think of that if you've read it, and because it'd be really interesting.
It does seem to be like, before I read it, I was aware that it was splitting opinion. That makes it interesting to talk about.
It does, yeah. That's very good.
Right, one that
lots of people have read.
I was going to say wouldn't have avoided is Girl, Woman, Other.
Can't avoid it. So you hadn't read this before?
No, I just started it when I'd read like the first 2 voice sections when the shortlist was announced. Okay, I thought it was truly excellent. I don't feel like I love it as much as some people do, but it's a brilliant book that I raced through. She's clearly an extraordinary writer, and actually it's one of those books, if I was talking about it in a vacuum, I would be incredibly enthusiastically singing its praises. If I feel like probably if I'd read it before everyone else had read it, I would be like, this is super exciting. But it's you read the book, you read books in the context that you read them, and I read it quite late on. I only read it in March, April time, and people were talking about how it's their favourite book ever, and I think it's not my favourite book ever, but I mean, it's just what I don't feel like I have anything to add. It's it's really,
it's been
really
so talked
good.
about it, yeah. Although not everybody loves it, obviously, and I've heard many different opinions about it, but I feel like a lot of the criticism being lobbed at this is quite unfair. I felt like that, whereas almost like with Angie Cruz's book, I could understand people's objections to it more, where I feel like this, because it is, the stories are so almost overtly political in some ways, and that she's very clearly giving a wide view of many different types of female experience in this, and so I think the whole politics of that has really divided some people, and feeling that I
haven't really seen anyone say negative things about it.
Okay, well, there's several videos on YouTube of people criticizing it very highly. You do / I should. And on Goodreads as well.
I don't go on Goodreads.
So I mean, it's probably healthier.
I can't. The problem with Goodreads is that I can stop myself going on Goodreads, but as soon as I'm on Goodreads, even if I'm checking someone else's book, I can't help it. I'll just check what my book is, and that's a bad idea. Sometimes I pop in, but I can't resist looking at my books, and that is always a bad plan. I remember when I had first started reading it, and we were talking on our live that we did, the reaction to the shortlist, was that you said to me I feel like you said to me that you you talked about the idea of missing people's voices, and because it's sort of 12 people, and I did find that a little bit, and I think that I thought the first section was the best one, and I did miss those characters, and I think that it did, obviously, they get kind of woven through, and I love that. You get
glimpses of them.
I really enjoy books that do that. I like when they kind of crop up. Although those of you where I had to flip back and make sure I could remember who they were. Yeah, because there's a lot. Because you're so with that character for a while, and then you get some other character's perspective on them, and they sometimes have a very different perspective on them from that character has of themselves. And so I think that just it's so brilliant how gives a fully rounded view of somebody, and how we experience the world, how we walk around thinking of ourselves in a certain way, and may not realize how other people think of us, or other people's perspective on us, which may be valid or not, as some of these perspectives obviously. And I'm sure it's one that if you reread it, you would get so much out of a second reread, already having those perspectives in your head when you then read the person's perspective on themselves.
More than just character development, as I was saying, with the politics, how it gives this rounded view of these political issues, which are really complicated, and you can have so many different perspectives on it, and there's divisions within divisions. It gives such a balanced view of current society, and how it's like developed over time, like how some of the older characters, their like development as like a feminist working in like the 70s or 80s obviously gives them a very different perspective of the younger characters now who have like grown up with society being a certain way that it is. And
it's very clever on that front, isn't it? And I think that it's very it does a very good job of balancing a real kind of generosity towards all its characters without ever being scared of highlighting the things that individual characters have got wrong or have got confused, and it really gets that nice balance. I also think what you're saying, it shows the importance of like I mean, diversity is such like a played out word now, isn't it? But I think that part of the issue we have is that as a white writer, I can just represent myself. I'm not called on to represent all white people in my stories or as a person. And when you don't have enough representation or diversity of voices, those books are used to like as a comment on a whole community in a way that I'm not called on to do as a white writer. And I think that it's why this book is so good and why we need more, because you have the space that the characters can be flawed and messy, and you have like bad and good people with it, but because there's so many different people all representing a sort of loosely black British experience, there's just that space for nuance. They don't have to all represent something. And I think that that's really why the book is special, and also shows why we need so much more of that, so that art of any kind isn't forced to represent a whole community in a way that we aren't asked to. And I think that this is just shows why that is so important, because this is such a good novel that can stand as a novel. Like, you can read it as a piece of fiction. You're not having it's like, even though obviously it is political in many ways, but you can read it as a piece of fiction, and you can just embrace the characters as fictional characters that are all saying different things and have different flaws and weaknesses. Which actually, just to link, is also why 1,000 Chips is good as well, because I think that not to compare, there's obviously, you know, intersect, like not to just say like the experiences of being a woman, not the experiences of being a black person, obviously, but you know, in the way that like the different communities and different minorities, you know, if you're in the position of oppression, you're called on. Like I feel like as a white writer, I'm never called on to be like represent white people, but as a woman, I sometimes feel like it's like a comment.
Yeah, and I've definitely felt that like early on when I was writing, and as being like a gay person, and how like to write gay characters, like so if I write a slightly villainous like gay character, am I sort of like turning on my own like community and that and all that like sort of panic, and so it definitely like has all those issues, but yeah, just as like as a sort of like character study of all these, it makes it such a like great conversation piece, doesn't it? Because everybody's gonna have their own favorite characters from this, and sort of wish that they had more of the story of certain characters. And
one thing I really did like though was the theatre stuff, and my boyfriend was in a play at the National last year, and it was I got to go to the press party, and it was funny, like, so it's although there's no champagne in it.
It's not
wine
that
and
fancy.
Beer. But I enjoyed. It's fun when you have a bit of experiences somewhere, and like, you know, I sort of spent a bit more time at the theatre last year because he was in a play there, and it was like fun getting to see all those bits, because that's quite like fresh in my mind.
No, I definitely always love that when reading a novel, and where it's a spot I've been to or someplace I'm very familiar with, and it's like, I know that, I can like totally picture everything about that, and
and the bits in King's Cross as well, even though King's Cross is obviously like super different now, but it's fun. It's fun reading about how it was before it was all super developed, and it's like a very,
because that's an area of London that has changed so much in the past 15 years,
and so I really enjoyed reading about how it used to be. I really think it's excellent, and I think it's really great, but it obviously has been everywhere. And even more, I feel like it's only growing. You know, she
in the past,
guest edited the magazine, and like there's been videos with like famous people asking her questions. Like it's
been a bestseller in the past few months,
which is
amazing. Fantastic. And has such a beautiful cover. I love the paperback. I mean, I loved the hardback cover as well. But
yeah, particularly good, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really beautiful. Though my partner's been reading this, so it's slightly beaten up now. So. Okay.
Yay. I say
a book that Anna has been talking about for
it feels like years.
Would it be amazing if this won? Because and you had been talking about it like
when we did our predictions for last year's prize, and I was like, "Don't read The Silence of the Girls, read The 1,000 Ships." Yeah,
because it only just came out, I think, like right after the cutoff point.
But I read it early, and I just really loved it. But I would say I haven't reread it, so I read it like a year and a half ago, maybe more, and I feel like my reaction is like, I love it, and then, but if you called on me to actually discuss it with any nuance, I probably would struggle. I'd meant to reread it, and I didn't, but I still love it. But I love, I loved multiple voices. I enjoy things. Well, it's interesting to talk about Dominicana as well, because I do enjoy when people do kind of unusual voices. Well, in present tense, it's hardly, but like, you know, things that are kind of traditionally hard to get right. And when someone gets it right, it's because she does the what do you call it? When it's like a collective voice. Because there's one of the like threads is the women of Troy, and it's like a collective we.
Yeah.
And I think it uses
exactly
it really
what that's called.
effectively, and I do enjoy that as a device when it's done right. Although I do think it's hard to get right. And as much as anything, I just love the framing of it, and love the framing of it as the kind of muses, kind of saying like these voices will be heard. I found it very powerful, and as has been documented regularly over the last couple of years in these videos, is my favourite of the kind of like Greek, you know, Science of Girls Circe, and this is definitely my favourite of the three. And I'm really delighted that it's been shortlist. I feel vindicated, as I've been banging on about it for so long, and I'm really happy that it's
finally
been
being recognised.
Yeah, I really think it's excellent, and I was really, really glad that you liked it as well, because I was worried I'd like built it up so much that it couldn't possibly.
I was slightly worried too, because when your friends are like, you have to read this book, you have to, it's so good, and I'm like, oh, but what if I don't like it as much? But I almost set myself up that I probably wasn't gonna enjoy it that much, and so then when I did and think like, wow, this is really good. Enjoyable, as well as really like fascinating and intellectual, and so like so many things to think about. But yeah, it's just such a pleasurable experience I had enjoying it, and I loved all the infighting amongst the like goddesses and about all these really like petty things, and just I just thought that was so funny and well done, but also some parts were so like poignant and moving and really heartbreaking, and so it took me on the full emotional journey.
And like I think that's what you say is so right, like it's such a readable, enjoyable book whilst also being really smart. And I think that it's always really impressive when books manage to do both of those things, and it's actually quite rare. Like it's one of those ones that I just, you have those books that you like but you would maybe recommend it quite selectively, whereas this is just one that I would really I just really think it's an excellent book. I think if you enjoy reading, then you enjoy it. I found the like very ending of the last like muse bit like hugely moving, and I just think it's really good. It's actually a feminist telling as we got into the Silence of the Girls, which I actually, enjoyed elements of, but I kind of bridled against it being called like a feminist retelling when it was so hung up on Achilles. You get what you're expecting. It does what it says on the tin. It actually is a feminist like telling of these stories, where the men like flit through. And it's fun because you get to be like, oh, that's that really famous person in the myth, but it's like a little cameo.
They are
And it's fun reading it from that perspective. I would just really highly recommend it. I think it's an excellent book.
But it is a book that, because there are so many characters, I did get confused at some points and had to flip back, and because since I'm not super familiar with all the Greek mythology, obviously like the main names I knew, but then there were a lot of minor names, and she does invent a few characters, doesn't she?
I can't remember any of the specifics.
I'm pretty sure she does. Yeah, and Natalie Haynes just has such an in-depth knowledge of Greek mythology in this period, so
she's an academic, right? I'm think so. Pretty sure that she's come from like an actual academic.
I'd be surprised
background.
If she didn't, because
but she's obviously she presents a show on Radio 4 about the classics. She has a podcast about it as well, so she knows what she's talking about.
She does.
In summary, I feel like if you go back and watch any women's prize video we've made from the last 2 years, I'll have talked about it. If you want more kind of specific.
It's very well covered.
Yeah.
So we'll move on to Hamnet by Maggie Offill,
which is such a it's so beautiful, isn't it? The cover.
It is. It's gorgeous.
Like, this blue.
But also very beautifully written.
Yes, I finished reading this yesterday when. The day that we're filming this, I finished it last night. So this one is the opposite. This is very, very fresh in my head. I am super interested to talk to you about this one because I know that you feel like I didn't go back and I read your review when you first did it because it was a while ago. I haven't gone back and read it because I wanted to like be able to talk about it properly and not just parrot back your review at you. But I have in my head that you felt like you didn't understand why it was about these people, and I must admit I find that super confusing. So I want you to tell
Right.
me about it. Tell me.
I think a lot of people have been confused by that too. Well, I think I'm slightly confused about it too, and trying to process like why I had that reaction. And I think it's mainly basically because I think I heard some like clip or maybe like I read something from Maggie O'Farrell where she said she was so fascinated by Shakespeare in this incident, and obviously he had a son named Hamnet who died, and then he named his play Hamlet, and how she was just wondering about that mystery of his feelings behind that. Obviously we know very little about Shakespeare's personal life and his feelings about things, so she wanted to go back and invent that. But then the novel isn't really about Shakespeare very much at all, because he's very much a peripheral character. And so, but I mean, it was more just like a disjoinder between her, I felt what were her initial intentions for the book, and then what the actual novel turned out to be. And obviously it's totally fine to have an idea for a novel, and then during the writing process it might become something very different, and that's totally fine. And maybe I'm getting this wrong and not representing it right, but yeah, I just felt like that sort of set up my expectations when I went into reading. I thought like, oh, this is going to give a very different perspective on Shakespeare, and then obviously you don't get very much about him. It's all about Agnes and Hamnet and his sisters, which is wonderful, and it's so richly psychological and complex, and showing their positions at that period of time. But then, I got slightly frustrated because then, like, not to give any spoilers, but like towards the end, it does like go back to Shakespeare, and then I feel like she sort of answers that initial question that she went in with, but answers it in what I felt was a quite obvious way. And I kept getting hung up while I was over the course of reading it, whereas I started thinking about novels that look at historical figures from a very different perspective. And one of the most obvious ones I went to was Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders, because that's about a father grieving, who's a very famous figure, and so about the conflict between his public role and then his personal life as just a father who is grieving for a young son who died. And so I almost started setting myself up sort of looking for that. I kind of, because Lincoln in the Bardo obviously gives such a like variety of perspectives on Lincoln that we haven't had before. I was sort of expecting that for Shakespeare. And I think it's totally fine in a way that she didn't do that, but this has to do more with my expectations of what I was looking for, I guess. Because I did love reading this novel. There was so much about it that I really enjoyed and felt emotionally involved with. So I don't want to... I feel like I've been almost like made in, because there are so many people that love this novel so much, and I know a lot of people are really angry it's not on the Booker Prize list this year, the main Booker Prize list. And so I almost feel like I'm being sort of pushed in this corner of like opposition, whereas I'm not against this novel at all, and I love her writing, and there were lots of scenes in it that I loved, but I did have slight issues with it in the way it was told, that it sort of misguides you, where the sister is sick at first and then the brother gets sick, and when you know the brother is going to die, because it like says it in the summary, and that's the whole like basis of the novel, and
it happened in history.
Yeah, and obviously she was probably sticking to the historical facts, but the way the narrative built, I just felt I was slightly being like jostled around between.
That's interesting, because I felt like that was kind of mirroring how Agnes felt. I also feel like we should just say at this point, when we talk about Agnes, we talk about the person that's known as Anne Hathaway in history. It's not like a separate woman. In some historical documents, like in her father's will, she was referred to as Agnes, which is why Maggie O'Farrell has chosen to call her that. But just for if people haven't read it, for the just absence of confusion, it's the same person we know as Anne Hathaway. It's Shakespeare's wife. But I felt like it mirrored her confusion of that, because I felt like, as you say, it's very clear from the book and history that it's Hamnet that dies. And so I felt like it wasn't misguiding, because we all know that that's where it's heading. And so the narrative follows Agnes's confusion, because Hamnet is a twin, and his twin sister Judith is born very frail. They think that she's not going to make it when she's born, and she is sort of sickly through childhood. And Agnes is, she has her attention focused on Judith, and she thinks that because in this novel, Agnes has a sort of kind of sixth sense, kind of she's very tuned to the natural world. It kind of invents this backstory for her that I thought was beautiful. So she has had this vision that she will have 2 children, and so when she has a daughter, and then they have twins, and she has this vision that 2 children will be by her bedside when she dies. And so when she has the twins and Judith is like kind of sickly and struggling, she assumes it's Judith that's in danger. So I felt like that focus on that just mirrors Agnes's kind of perspective and her focus that it will be Judith that's in danger.
Yeah, and it adds a complexity to her grief, obviously, because the guilt she feels after he dies, where she feels like, So yeah, I'm gonna say you're totally right about that, and I'm wrong, because I like no, but really, yeah, because that totally makes sense, and I think that's quite effective. How
it's interesting what you say about kind of expectation, and I think that when we talked about it a little bit in terms of like Girl, Woman, Other and the hype around that, and this is a similar one in that I'm a big Maggie O'Farrell fan. I've actually read I haven't read her non-fiction. I am, but I've read every single one of her novels.
That's supposed to be brilliant too.
And there's no reason I haven't. It's just one that I haven't got to. But I've read all of her novels, and this is very different. But I'm a big fan of her writing, and so I saved this one to last because I thought I would like it. But I was also nervous just because of the hype around it, and also that I already know that I love her. I was really nervous to read it, and I also sort of had in the back of my head what I knew you thought. But it's just like that expectation. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I guess for me, I loved the centering of Agnes's story. It's always interesting, the idea of the like women behind these famous people, especially in history when we have so little record of who they were. I also think it's interesting because there's obviously I don't know. I think that she must have read this, but there's the Virginia Woolf essay about Shakespeare's sister, where she imagines like not Shakespeare's real sister really, but like the idea that if Shakespeare had a sister who was equally as interested in writing and letters and expressing herself, but was given all the same kind of opportunities of which her gender kind of didn't permit her, what could she have done, and also imagines what would have happened to her, there's also a reference to that essay in my new children's book, which children probably will not get, but I entertain myself by putting these things in there.
Oh, that's really fun.
There's a bookshop in it called Shakespeare's Sisters, which turns out is a famous band as well, band and a famous song. I'm not really into music, and I didn't really realise, but mine is a Virginia Woolf reference. But I kind of enjoyed that kind of playing on like that, and I would assume that O'Farrell has read that, and I felt like there was that's interesting, and I love the kind of story that she constructs, and that fiction gives her this ability to kind of construct this whole life. But Shakespeare is like, he is present in it, although he's never referred to by name. He's always Agnes's husband or the Latin tutor, and he's the first sort of 2/3 of the book alternates between Hamnet getting sick, but also William and Agnes meeting. So he's very present in those bits, and then he's very present in the third bit. But like, Agnes is undeniably the main character, obviously. But I think you're right when you say that, like, that's where she started from, and then it kind of grew from there. And an integral part of kind of thinking about how Shakespeare would have reacted to that is, I suppose, how his wife would have reacted to it, and how his family would have reacted to it. And that's part of how because in the book it's presented that he just can't cope with the grief of it, really, and his wife is essentially depressed. And from a modern perspective. And he sort of he flees that. He runs away from it. He can't cope with it.
So it's like many fathers probably do when they can't deal with emotional stuff at home. They just like lose themselves in their work, and
in a way that Agnes
neglect
can't.
Their family.
I thought it was beautiful. It really it made me weep. Like, it's incredibly moving. And she's just she's a very, very talented writer. And I like books that do like fictionalized versions of real people, and you know, we're all like, the national imagination is fascinated by Shakespeare, and the international imagination perhaps, but you know, and also I really enjoyed reading all the Stratford stuff. Like, I worked really close to Stratford for a few years and went to the theatre there. The RSC used to, I was a school librarian, we used to take kids to see stuff at the RSC there, and like, you know, I've been to Stratford lots of times, so I really enjoyed kind of the kind of historical Stratford. And you know, if you live around that area, obviously it's very, very present, all the Shakespeare stuff, and it's nice it's interesting and moving imagining him as a real person.
And I was like, just before you came here, I was listening to a little interview with Maggie Offill, because I wanted to like try to think more and try to process my feelings more, and I think part of my reaction is due to my own sort of like ignorance around Shakespeare and that whole historical period, because obviously I know Shakespeare's major plays and stuff, and but actually I've never like looked that much into his like personal life, and so
That's
like I wasn't aware of the general public opinion about Anne Hathaway, and she says how she partly why she wanted to give it so much to her perspective is because she's seen by some people as this slightly malign figure that was controlling or like distracting, or
and she's older than
Shakespeare
and
so I didn't have any preconceptions about her as a historical person, even though obviously little is known about who she was. So that partly added to my sort of like misstep of being like, well, why is it so much about her?
Right.
So,
that's really interesting, because I think that in the UK, especially in the Midlands, like Shakespeare is just, it's so present, and like it's Stratford is just so much to do with Shakespeare. And I didn't know, I mean, we don't historically know a lot about his wife, but like what we did know, I just sort of I wasn't even like taught it. You just like pick it up from like being near Stratford. Yeah, and I think that's an interesting perspective. But you know, that's like it's why books are interesting. It's why we can make these ridiculously long videos, because we talk about it, because we do. It's fascinating, isn't it? Like every individual
has a
person
personal experience,
meets a book in a different way. We all bring our own experience and histories and what we know and what we don't know to them, and that's why. But that's why they're kind of magical, isn't it? Because it wouldn't be interesting to talk about them if we all had exactly the same reaction to them. It would just become this like objective, boring thing.
Yeah.
And it's super interesting, because that hadn't even occurred to me, because it's so much of my like as a British person, as someone who lived in the Midlands, as someone who like kind of studied history and like English, like it's just so much like Shakespeare myths are like just a part of my kind of experiences. How do you feel about Shakespeare? Do you like Shakespeare in Love?
I do for a very specific reason.
Is
because
it Joseph Fiennes?
No, it's more the sort of like gender bending when Gwyneth Paltrow dressed up as a man, and then they have that kiss where Gwyneth Paltrow is dressed as a man and he doesn't know that it's her. That I thought that was super sexy.
It's a really sexy film. Yeah. Fair.
Okay, we've just taken a slight moment to adjust the windows, because I have to apologize about the lighting for this, because I'm just in my home and relying on natural light, and it's a very cloudy day in London, and it's just started raining.
And a very changeable day.
Yeah, and I've been aware that Anna has been slightly in shadow, so I felt bad that I'm sort of I didn't plan it that way. So I just slightly readjusted the curtains, so hopefully it's slightly better now.
I think it's a bit more even.
Yeah, so that's good.
Right, we're on to book 5.
On to weather,
which,
appropriately enough.
Yeah,
as it just started raining.
I haven't brought an umbrella. We're going to try and be a bit more brief with this one, because this is the one that we both, when we did our predictions video, we had both already read this one. So if you want to kind of hear slightly fresher opinions about, like as in fresher after we'd read it, go and have a look at our Longlist predictions video, where we do talk about this a little bit, but we'll cover the basics. But if you want a bit more, that's where to find more opinions. You like this more than me. I thought it was good, but it hasn't like, I thought it was very good. I think she's an excellent writer. It didn't like stay with me in the way that I would want a kind of prize winner to. But
do you think that's because it's so short? that it...
No.
Okay. Fair enough.
Only because there are really short books I've read. Like,
have really stuck
I immediately think of like the Danielle Dutton Margaret the First, which is a similar length book, which I still think about regularly and kind of cite as I'm always like, I want another book like that. I mean, I think probably, you know, it being slight does kind of mean it has to do more in those pages, but I don't think it's just that. And also, I mean, even her last book, Department of Speculation, I really, really loved, and that's really kind of stuck with me. I never quite I thought it was really good, made me feel very anxious about climate change. And it's kind of like an interesting one. I'm not sure I'd want to reread it with the virus going on, actually, because it doesn't talk about that specifically, but it's got a lot of kind of like world
and actually we didn't talk about that with Hamnet too, that, you know,
yes,
there's a whole section basically following a plague and the spread
and
of it through a few different people and how it arrives with their family.
Which I thought was such a brilliantly written sequence.
Yeah,
and also like the theatres are closed in London a bit because because of the plague. So it's funny how these, because obviously when she was writing it, she had no idea. We don't tend to talk about like trigger warnings with books a lot, or as in we don't. And several of these books have sort of things you might want to point out. I think it's very, very, anyone watching this probably knows this, but obviously the whole book is really about the death of a child, and I know people who are kind of very sensitive, not like rightly so, to that, and I just wanted to sort of say like the whole book is really an exploration of the grief around that, and I can imagine that it would be
Hamnet, that is not
like Hamnet, and I can imagine that it could be a very upsetting read if that's something that you are kind of avoiding. So
it's good to point out.
But back to Weather, which just I thought it was very clever. I almost felt like I was reading like a really good like essay, almost like really good journalism. Like I really found it very interesting, and I thought it was excellent. But it didn't really have that like emotional kind of gut punch that I like prefer to have, I suppose. And it hasn't sort of stayed with me because it would have been like 9 months ago that I read it, probably. 9 months ago that I read it, and it's not one that I've thought about or come back to.
I almost felt like it was like a blend between a like style of like essay and or like blog posts or a series of like tweets, since it's all very like short sections which aren't necessarily connected with each other, although it does like link up to form a larger story, but you just get these snippets of experience rather than a sort of narrative that's fully fleshed out, but also is doing something like very unique on its own. I don't think it's like quite that like gimmicky of combining those different styles.
It doesn't feel gimmicky at all. It's one of those books that like I do slightly struggle to have like opinions about. Like I thought it was an interesting, good read.
Yeah, I guess it just and I'm slightly mad at myself that I didn't reread it, because I sort of wonder if my opinion would change, but just like my gut reaction reading it the first time, I was just so struck by it and really involved in it. And also you talked about how anxious it makes you feel, like quite rightly I think, but also my like main memory of it is just that I thought it was very funny, and because she just approaches these things from just like it's not like sort of like cracking jokes, but just a sort of like humorous perspective on things.
It's quite witty, isn't it, at times? And I did find that, but I think that my main emotion was, oh God, the climate crisis. That was my main emotion.
And also there's it's a very like personal struggle with her brother's struggles with addiction, and so I feel like it is a very like personal story, as well as, you know, saying something bigger about the environment. And
I thought it was very good. I wouldn't want it to win.
Okay.
But we'll get on to that.
Yeah.
I also felt like I had more articulate thoughts 6 months ago.
Yeah, so
we should link below. Right.
We'll have lots to talk about.
Which, do you remember when we filmed, which one was it when we filmed, when you admitted that you'd never read Mantel, and I had like an extreme reaction to it? What? But now you have.
Now I have read it. I've read the entire series.
Which is quite an achievement. I am so glad that I had reread the other two in advance of this coming out, and then reread this and read this immediately, because like this is an intimidating. I'm very impressed with anyone who hadn't already kind of geared up for reading it to kind of have read it just for this, or to have read like mega points if you read the whole trilogy just to read this one because it's shortlisted.
I deserve even more points because I did even more work. I read a biography of Thomas Cromwell
you really
in
did
preparation
actually.
for
That's
this to really
you do get bonus points.
Commitment. But I think Hilary Mantel is totally worth it and deserves that work that has to go into it. Sorry, there's a police siren going by. It's slightly annoying me. And the blue lights are flashing.
Hilary Mantel is a genius.
Hilary Mantel
I think is what
brilliant.
I'm saying.
She's such a great writer, and just like on sentence by sentence basis too, it's like so beautifully written and draws you in. So like I know a lot of people's main reaction to this, I think was slightly similar to mine going into it as somebody who hasn't studied this period of history, and I was familiar with a lot of the main people in it, but there's a lot of peripheral characters because there was a lot of people around in this historical period in
and a lot of them had the same
royal
name.
court. Yeah, and a lot of them had the same name, so it does get quite confusing to keep track of. Yeah, I had to stop at several points, and I know that's just very disruptive to the reading experience when you're having to stop and flip back or like look up things on the internet to understand better who it is so that you can understand the scene that you're reading about. But at the same time, I felt like it was worth it, but also I was able to get to a point, I think particularly in this novel, where I just was happy to let some of that go. Like, I don't quite know all of the context of what's happening here, but I think that's okay. I can just sort of continue along. And you get so many of these scenes, I think, because it is all from Thomas Cromwell's point of view, and he was involved in so many different things, and so of the pressing issues that had to do with the monarchy at that time. And so I feel like it is natural that she goes into this. But the question I'd like to ask you, since it is such a long novel, and we've talked before about like big books like this, and do you think this novel justifies its length?
Interesting question. Okay, so the thing is, I think I would read as many pages as I love her so much. I love this series. When I got to the end, I felt bereft that it was over, and I want to read the whole of the Tudor period through Hilary Mantel's writing. I feel genuinely bereft that I don't get to I want to see the rest of the wives. I want to see Elizabeth. I want to see it in her writing. So just on a personal level, it felt, I loved every page. It didn't drag. And I don't know, it's hard to separate out your kind of personal. I'm such a, I'm just at this point, by the time this book came out, I'm such a Mantel fangirl. I'm so invested in the series. We've been waiting such a long time that, for me, it was just a very, I don't know how objective I really am about these books anymore, because they've just been the last 10 years of my reading life, and I love them so much, and I'm so excited to read it. And I loved how long it was, because I would read it, I wanted more. So I guess for me, yes. And also so much happens in it. I didn't really feel like there was bits that dragged, but again, I'm super invested in it, and also kind of have that, having studied the period at university background of there's just not a thing that happens at court that I am not interested in how Hilary Mantel writes about it. But equally, it's a really long book, over 2,000 pages.
Yeah, well, I added up my editions.
Really
I have, it's 2,009 pages in total.
Oh, it's almost
for the
exactly
3 books.
it's a commitment, and I get that. You have to. I mean, I'm feeling like you don't feel like it. What, I don't know. Did you feel like it warranted the length?
Well, weirdly, I feel like it could have been shorter, but it also could have been longer, in that there were sections of it which I thought were super interesting, certain of the historical personages which I wasn't aware of before, but then I started reading a little bit up about them, and I thought, wow, this is a really interesting situation, and so I could almost happily read another novel entirely about this situation. So yeah, in that way, I was glad it was that long, in that it sort of tipped me off to all these other stories that I got interested in, since I'm not as familiar with the historical period. But then at the same time, I felt like it did slightly stray from the main point, which this third book really is about the relationship between Thomas and Henry.
Yeah.
Because obviously it breaks down, and in a very tragic way. And
spoiler, he dies.
Yeah. I felt like I did wish at some points it was more almost like streamlined for that, but then like as I sort of said, it like I do understand why she wrote all that, because it is fully invested in Thomas Cromwell's point of view, and these were all the concerns he was having at the time when there were multiple crises happening in the politics of the time around the court and Henry's rule. I did enjoy the experience as a whole. I'm if I ever have the willpower to go back and reread them all, I'm sure I'll get a lot more and understand the relationships.
The first two in prep for this one coming out. Which is your favourite of the trilogy?
It's tricky. I would probably say Bring Up the Bodies, just because that I felt that novel was more concentrated in that way. Not just that it was shorter, but that it was so much about Anne Boleyn's. It was following her storyline basically in this. That's why the trilogy
is like very clever. Like Wolf Hall is very much it's Thomas and it's Cromwell and Thomas More, and it's clever. Like, you know, the first one leads up to More's execution, and then book 2 is Cromwell and Anne Boleyn, and it leads up to Anne Boleyn's execution, and then the third one is Cromwell and Henry, and it leads up to Cromwell's execution. I just think that's a very clever way of structuring. If you're talking about Cromwell, it's just a very clever way to do it, to have those executions at the end, and each one is sort of Cromwell's battle, essentially, like battle of wits with a different person. I think Wolf Hall is still my favourite as a novel, even though I love Anne Boleyn.
Okay.
I think also partly just like I think the freshness of it, in that it was the first Mantel I'd read, and I'd never really read anything like it, and I think just the excitement of not, you know, I think often with series you get that, you know, because the second and the third you're expecting it to be that good and you know the style of it, whereas I can just remember like kind of like this like visceral excitement of reading the first one, and I think that will always kind of be my favorite. Rereading them, I enjoyed it more. I thought it was so tight and clever, but I do think Bring Up the Bodies has my favourite last line of a novel. There are no endings if you think so. You are deceived as to their nature. They are all beginnings. Here is one. That's the last line of a book. It's so good.
That is brilliant, isn't it? Yeah.
It's so good. Every time I read it, I'm just like, that's so good. I'm obsessed with that as the last few sentences of a novel. And I thought that The Mirror and the Light was just like, I thought it was a very fitting conclusion to such an epic trilogy that sort of had such an impact on me, and also just publishing and writing. And I thought I wept through the last 100 pages of it, because you just know what's going to happen, and it's so tragic, and it's just extraordinary that she has turned around. Like, you know, Cromwell is just seen as this, he's seen so differently in history traditionally, and to have like made this the kind of idea of him that's present in so many people's heads is such a achievement. And I just love that this like a massive, long, complicated historical literary fiction novel has become like such a touchstone for people, and that it's so successful. It makes me really happy.
It's very encouraging, yeah.
And I love her. I got so starstruck when I met her. Like, I was properly like, I met lots of people, like people who are technically more famous than her, and I'm like, but I was so starstruck. I was just like, like, and she was so nice, and she said she liked my hair, and I was just like, and then she gave me a hug, and then
it makes it even more sad that there's not going to be the women's prize party for the winner, because she would obviously be there, and we're missing that opportunity.
Yeah, I'm so
and
sad.
Maggie Offill,
I'm sad. I mean, it's just a great,
it's
a great party, and this is a great list. So,
do you think?
Okay.
So thinking about Thomas Cromwell's character, because I've been sort of wondering this about how, because he obviously must have known in a way this was coming for him, and because he's very aware of Henry's web processes thing, and I love how Mantel sort of like foreshadows it slightly in some ways. And like early on, he's having a conversation with Chapuis, where Chapuis like, you know, that your position is entirely reliant on Henry's favor of you, and if that goes, that's, and so like I feel like
it's foreshadowed through the whole trilogy. Rereading it, I was like, it's so clever. And
I think there's a point where he slightly meditates like, I could be living in Italy in like in a very palatial like circumstances,
so
and
sad.
like, and so but he chooses, or maybe there was no way to disentangle himself from Henry without endangering himself in like in another way of being seen slightly as treasonous.
Yeah. Although I also do think that like, because we've all got accustomed to Mantel's portrayal of him, he was a brutal, fiercely ambitious man.
Right.
And I do think that he always knew that this was a risk, and I don't know that he was able to give up the power and the rising and the influence it gave his son. And I think that you know, it's a novel, and just like in Hamnet, you know, she invents this whole like mystical backstory for Agnes, Anne Hathaway. Like, you know, this is like, it's very, very rooted in history, but you know, she's inventing a character, and like there is a level of romanticism, which I don't think is a criticism because it's a piece of fiction. But he was, you know, you wouldn't want to, like, he was brutal and he was ambitious, and that's in there for sure. And you know, who knows really what he was like, obviously. But I do think that as a novel, you kind of read it and it's so sad when he talks about like these lives he could have had, and he could have done this and he could have done that, but there's not really any indication in history that he wanted to do that. But he, in the novel, he obviously feels like it's the only option is to keep rising. But I mean, he must have, you know, he did know the risk, but I think that sometimes in these situations you just have to keep going, don't you? Because what are the other options? And power is addictive, and he clearly, you know, he came from very poor roots, and you know, the lure of actual income, being able to look out for your family and the people around you, like. And
being told to stick it to all those noblemen who keep reminding him that, you know, you're the son of a blacksmith. Like,
and like you say, I do think
are?
that it gets to a level where he pissed off so many people that, like, how was he going to be able to extricate himself? And, you know, this is a time when, like, even if he technically left, like, people just got killed, you know, like accident, you know, people, life was a...
And there's a plague.
Life was a less precious thing, I think. Not for the people living it, but, you know, just the sheer quantity of people who were executed. And, you know, Henry said he in real life, he said he regretted executing Cromwell. And
just showed, sort of the desperation he was getting to in his, like, mania for trying to keep his power and position, Henry. But as like a study of the effects of power and how it plays out in politics, I think all these novels are so brilliant in that, and has like real relevance. I mean, when reading this, I couldn't help thinking about figures like the current president of the United States. I don't like to say his name because like Voldemort, I don't like to say, but or like Rupert Murdoch, of these men who like wield such power and are so obsessed with their power and image and creating a dynasty, and how both of those men have had multiple children by different wives and have this such a like fierce attachment to their power. They like, no matter the consequences of what they do, they need to hold on to it, so that even though Henry obviously did have like a great affection and friendship for him, his like idea of himself as a monarch, as obviously the monarchs, you know, conceive themselves as like anointed by God, having this position, and that position supersedes his status as a human man and the relationships he has with people.
She does a really good job of getting across, I think, how like ideas of monarchy and kingship were very foreign from how the monarchy is now. Like, it really was like, you know, appointed by God, essentially kind of a level above human. I think she does a really good job of getting that across. And Henry's such a fascinating person, like a historical figure. I have felt that I think that his physical decline had like I think this is standard held historical opinion, but like he obviously coped extremely badly with his physical decline. Yeah. And when he had that injury and he started putting on huge amounts of weight. Yeah,
like all athletic people who suddenly can't be athletic all the time anymore, but still eat as much as they do.
I think that
as gluttonous.
But and also like, but just the idea, his idea of himself was this like golden boy king who was incredibly athletically kind of, and because he was trained up, because he was the second son, he was sort of trained up. He was incredibly good at like jousting and writing. Well, I don't know if he was incredibly good at writing, but he wrote a lot, you know. And because he was the second son, so he was kind of a Renaissance prince, because Arthur was supposed to be doing the actual running the country. And I think that that's obviously the combination of that and then being like anointed by God had a huge impact on his like mental stability. And I say I need to really stop saying I think this because of the things I studied and historians who believe these things. Like I don't want to like set myself up as like I've come up with this clever new theory.
you can still think
that all the evidence, so and I think that she does a good job of kind of showing that, and like how he's kind of obsessed with his image and like
and also the psychological impact. I mean, she notes how it was like a daily thing. How it's like sometimes, some days it was worse, sometimes it was, but the pain was like always
because
there.
Because the medicine just like the medicine wasn't there to do anything other than like he had it lanced like almost death daily, I think, because it just like it sealed over and there was just all sorts in there, and the only thing they knew to do was just to let it out, which definitely probably, you know, was better for it, but it just kept getting infected, and you know, it just meant that he was in pain most of the time. And I thought, and then also kind of railed against that because he felt like as a king, and like why was God doing this to him essentially? You know, why was God making it so hard for him? And just what a mindset. And yeah, I say like obsessed with his dynasty, and but also that's interesting as well because of like his family background. You know, his grandfather, obviously, like with the Wars of the Roses, like it wasn't a secure dynasty, you know, and he'd really had like it impressed on him that, you know, it was up to him to really like secure it. This was the generation where you could really like secure it and everyone would accept it as kind of, it wasn't a kind of stolen thing. And you know, he obviously felt that, you know, it wasn't a dynasty. They've been on the English throne for generations and generations, and clearly that weighed very heavily on him. That doesn't excuse him, you know, being awful. But I really hope that she writes more Tudor. Do you think she will? I hope she writes more Tudor.
I think, hasn't she said that?
Imagine Elizabeth's reign through her eyes. I would read that.
It would be amazing, but I don't know if she, because hasn't she like said like she's done with historical fiction, or I think I just saw that like headline somewhere or something. I don't know if it's actually true, but I thought she did say. So yeah, but also it's interesting that you said that so Wolf Hall was the first book you've read by Hilary at that time, because I went into this having read her novel Beyond Black and her memoir Giving Up the Ghost, and so I was familiar in her writing style. She often brings up issues to do with the ethereal, and there's so much in these novels where like ghosts have almost this like physical presence in, I mean, it's not like a ghost story, but like in the,
but I mean, almost it is at times,
because they're so present there for Thomas and Henry as well. It's referred to how these people who have died, and that I thought that was so beautifully done, how just it like impacts their psychological reality of being so aware of these figures who have passed, that are still present for them in their lives.
The more I read of her, like I think she's like ghosts are definitely kind of literal, metaphorical ghosts are clearly something that she is very interested in, and kind of is a motif, I would say, of her writing. I just think they're masterpieces, honestly.
Do you think there was any possibility that this novel might have failed for you? Because there are some writers, I'm going to say like, should I say this? I don't know. But, well, to go back to a previous Women's Prize winner, with The Glorious Heresies,
Oh.
which was a novel I loved so much and is the first part of a proposed trilogy. And then Lisa McNerney published the second novel, The Bloody...
I have read it though. Blood Miracles.
The Blood Miracles, yes. Okay. I think I might have just like blocked it out because I just felt that novel was like such a disappointment. Which I mean, it's not a bad novel, I don't think, but it just, after the expectations I had from The Glorious Heresies, it just, I felt like didn't work.
I feel exactly the same. I thought The Glorious Heresies is an extraordinary book. And The Blood Miracles I thought was a good book, but it doesn't have... But I really thought about this when I read that, because I was like, how much of it is just because I wasn't expecting The Glorious Heresies, and the way it's written is just so exciting, and, you know, it's hard when you've written something super innovative to, how do you do a sequel to something innovative? Do you just do something completely different? Or do you... Because as soon as it's
And I think she did really try to do something different, even though she used the same characters.
It's a good book. Like, it is a good book, but it's not the same. It's not on the same level as The Glorious Heresies. But it is difficult. It's interesting. So I think it could have failed for me, in the sense of, like, I have this book. I had the same experience with those books. And I think, you know, like, even though not to the same degree, but like, I've loved Ali Smith's whole seasonal quartet, but definitely some of them I prefer to others. But I felt confident also that it wouldn't, in the sense that I've read a fair amount of Mantel now, and like have loved everything, and I just feel that she's very confident in what she's trying to do with the books. And I think if you've written two and both of the two have worked, you've kind of got a lot of it established, haven't you? Like, obviously there's questions of execution and pace and, you know, all the nuances of it, but could I do think something would have had to go horribly wrong for it to be significantly worse when it's a third book rather than a second book, you think?
Yeah. Although for, I think, any writer to have that kind of expectation on you, that
I can't even
the first
imagine.
2 novels of your trilogy won the Booker Prize and
even imagine.
are much beloved.
But that means she'd spent a really long time writing it. So.
Yeah.
It's
there's just the potential there, I think, for somebody to sort of choke and just be like, oh,
for sure,
publish that.
I do think it's a good. She's been writing for, she's been published for, like, did her first book come out in like the late 80s?
Yeah.
So do you know what I mean? I think it might maybe.
Writer.
And she's published. She's used to have a lot of books out that didn't really kind of make a impact, and I think she comes across as sort of someone who's quite like
secure in herself.
In her writing, I think in terms of her, I can't comment. Obviously, I don't know. But
I just meant
she
in
does
her.
seem in her writing. Like, I feel like she does know what she wants to do and say, and there's always going to be questions of execution, but like, I feel like she's someone who has a real like handle on her craft. I don't want to sound too pretentious.
No, she definitely does.
Right. What would your preference order be? As just purely on a personal. Shall I do mine? I've thought about mine. So
okay, first. Let me think for a minute.
So personal preference, this. So
okay.
Top to bottom. So my personal favourite was the Mantel, absolutely 100%.
Could have predicted that.
It's my second favourite book I've read this year. Hamnet and Girl, Woman, Other are probably pretty equal, actually. Like, I thought they were both really excellent. I didn't love either of them as much as I think that some people did, but I thought they were both truly excellent books that I just thought they were both brilliant. Actually, honestly, the top 4 are like... A Thousand Ships is equal with that as well. I think A Thousand Ships
number 4.
I know, but that's only because I really think it's a very strong list. And I also think that sometimes, like, when you've read something a while ago, like I feel like I have been talking about it. It was in my top 10 books of last year. Like, it's, it's well documented how good I thought it was, and these are a bit fresher and newer.
Yeah.
But, like, this one's, okay, number 1. These are all, like, actually pretty even for me. Mm-hmm. And then this one, which I thought was good, but hasn't really kind of stayed with me. And then this one, which I didn't like. I'm also aware that I just read this yesterday. So, like, if you asked me on a different day, I could see these 3 shuffling round.
I have that thing of, like, freshness in my mind, too, since I literally just finished The Mirror and the Light.
Right.
So it's so present in my mind, and there's so much to think about that it's still all just sort of floating around in my head.
No. What?
I'm say that sort of on equal footing are these two novels, The Mirror and the Light and Weather. And then next I would have Girl, Woman, Other, the three. Then Hamnet.
Okay.
Then Dominicana. I put them upside down.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. Like,
and Dominicana.
It's
and
honestly wild to me that
Ships.
anybody could put Dominicana over 1,000 Ships. Like...
Oh... Yeah, no, I mean, just in terms of personal preferences of how I...
No, fair. Okay.
I'm thinking about predictions of what the judges might choose. There's so many issues, like...
I would be so surprised if it wasn't Hamnet or Girl, Woman, Other. I really think it's between one of those two. I think that Dominicana isn't very good. And I also think that because it splits their opinion, I can't imagine a judging panel all agreeing, because obviously it's worked for some people and it's not worked for other people, and the chances of all five of them being on one side I think are quite slim. 1,000 Ships I think is wonderful. I don't necessarily think it's a prize winner. I also think that it's quite like...
amidst this competition.
Yeah,
it's like...
and this isn't a criticism, but it also feels like a book that maybe could have been written at any point over the last 5 years. I don't know. It doesn't feel like... Although, I don't know, it's very clever and innovative in its... Maybe, do you know what, maybe that's not fair, and it's because last year was like the year of the Greek myth retellings, and timing has gotten to that. Whether I think I can't see it winning. Like, I don't think it's special. I don't think it's special enough. I think it's too slight, not in...
But why would it go on the shortlist if it doesn't have a chance of winning, even though it is shorter than the other
Because there
novels?
are 5 people with different tastes who have to come to an agreement of 6 books to go on a shortlist. I've judged prizes where not all the books, I would say, had an actual chance of winning because of the... Not politics, just the personal preferences of how of people and how we've picked it, and it depends on the number of books you can pick, and it depends on whether you want the shortlist to be like a great representation of what's been published, and you want something that there's something for everyone there. You know, I think that you never know. You just never know. So
but also, there are sometimes when you think like a novel has really good quality, but it's like not absolute top.
Right, and you want to
like
celebrate
I felt that way about The Dutch House by Anne Patchett, where I think I said at the time, like, I think this should be listed, but I don't think it should win.
Right.
Whereas,
and I think that's sometimes that you want to celebrate a book, but it doesn't necessarily mean it should win. Also, it might be that like there was 5 books they agreed on and everyone loved, and they were like, well, we have to pick another one, so we really like this one, so let's give it some extra sales. But like it's
I think more just for like the sake of like wanting to root for a dark horse. That like, could you imagine if Jenny Offill wins over?
I think I would not be enthusiastic about that. I don't think they will give it to The Mirror and the Light.
No.
I think that...
Even though she's been shortlisted for the previous 2 novels, but hasn't actually won.
But I mean, that almost kind of is more fuel for that, because it hasn't won. I also think that giving a prize to a 900-page novel that's the 3rd in a trilogy that's already got 1,100 pages is a choice. However much I love the book, I also think that it probably will win the Booker. I also think that, and this is when we get into talking about Girl, Woman, Other, you never know what prize, how much, you never know. I feel like you can put them down if you need to. Yeah,
my fingers are going to break.
I think that you never know how much, I mean, I don't think they're ever supposed to think about these things technically, but you never know how much judges decide to take into consideration things around like the fact that like Maggie has never won a major prize, the fact that everyone was really cross that it's not in the book along list, the fact that The Mirror and the Light has won the Booker twice and has a very strong shot of winning it again, the fact that Girl, Woman, Other has been everywhere, and I do think often prizes like to have a book that they can kind of claim some of its success.
Yeah.
And I think that...
But then also the fact that a lot of people think that it should have been the singular winner of the Booker last year, and could this be her chance to win it solely on her own? 6
months ago, I would have said Girl, Woman, Other has got it in the bag, 100%. I think the fact that it has only gone from success to success, deservedly and wonderfully so, does mean that has gone a long way to negate people's frustrations that it joint won the Booker, because it has been so successful. I also think it's not a book that the prize can really claim any, like, it can't claim it, can it? And I do think prizes like to be able to sort of feel like they have had,
the book
which is
championed.
why my money is on Hamnet. I think it's an excellent book. I think that, so I had thought Evaristo had it in the bag, but having just seen how books have been talked about over the last 6 months, and having read it, this is what my money is on.
Yeah, me too. I think Hamnet.
I'm trying to put literal money on it, but no one's got odds for it this year. I don't know.
I don't know if they don't do that anymore, because I've definitely bet on, like, I bet on the Glorious Heresies to win, and I won some money. So
I won money last year on American Marriage. Oh. I wonder if it's the time, and you can bet on the Booker. So I wonder if the timing changes have caused a bit of a kerfuffle. But I've emailed William Hill to ask if I can bet on it, so I'll let you know. You can email them and ask them on anything, and they will say if they'll give you odds for it. So if they do, I'll let you know.
Oh yeah, because definitely like to put.
But I would be extraordinarily surprised if it wasn't Girl, Woman, Other, which I definitely think there's still a significant chance that might take it. And I think that you just never know what the judges are, what they're going to take into consideration. But I do think Maggie is like beloved. The book is beloved. Everyone was irritated that it wasn't on the Booker Longlist. And I feel like it's a bit more of a... You can't call it an underdog because it's so beloved. But when you compare it to Girl, Woman, Other... Also, like, Maggie O'Farrell isn't like as much of a big deal in the US. I do feel like it's one that the prize can be like really get behind, and it's newer. It's not a paperback yet. I'm like, I don't know.
And it'd be great to see, like, similarly with Bernadine Evaristo, that a lot of people are going back and reading her back catalogue now, that it would introduce some readers who haven't read Maggie O'Farrell before and might fall in love with her writing style and want to read some of her past novels.
But she's excellent. Her books are all really, really different, actually. I would, read kind of blurbs or reviews, or if you, they're very different. There's lots of different things. I would recommend different ones to different people. But Headline of Tinder Press has just reissued them all in lovely new paperback covers. Yeah.
Well, that's handy.
I mean, they don't know. I just should say
no,
can't read anything into that.
But it's just.
I mean, they obviously will be. I mean, they obviously, I'm sure, are very hopeful. So I think also the level of just like gut instinct. I think like when I was reading it, I felt like before I started reading it, I was like, it's going to be Evaristo or this one, and then reading it kind of reinforced that, because I think that it's beautiful. Like, I don't know how much you can call it timely. But because that's the thing about Girl, Woman, Other, isn't it? Like, it feels like this year with the Black Lives Matter movement and just everything. I feel like a book about the Black British experience it's great that it's done so well, and I think that it obviously speaks to things that are very present at the moment in the kind of public discourse, and like I like where we're talking about in the like. These are things that it's not new to 2020, obviously. And actually, it's stuff that should be in the public discourse all the time until it's fixed. But obviously, just in terms of this year has
consciousness raising and people wanting to
and
read more and be more informed and see lots of different perspectives and
So Evaristo or O'Farrell for sure. I would be really surprised if one of the others won. And I think that I'm tipping towards the Offill, although my personal favourite is the Mantel. So
great list. So let us know your opinions. What do you think of the list? If you want to write about any books in particular, who are you going to be rooting for to win the prize on September 9th? I'm not sure if they're going to do like a live broadcast.
They'll do something
live. So it'll be very exciting to follow along. Although I'll actually be on holiday during that time, so I'll be tuning in from some other place. But I'll be excitedly following along. And I can't wait to see, because there's just there's so many different ways it could go.
It is. I think that I would be underwhelmed if the Jenny Offill or Dominicana won. But even any of the others, I would be excited to see win. Although, my money's on Hamnet. But this is the end. This is the end of this year's cycle, really. But we'll see you relatively soon, because it's already taken. We'll be back. Like what? When do we do our predictions videos? Like February, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be really soon in comparison to how when it normally is. But But if you watch this far, thank you very much for
Yes.
watching us talk for so long. But you can see there's been a bit of a build up to this video because we haven't
to talk about a lot of these before.
been able to make our usual dozen videos talking for hours about these books before. So
You get it all in one go.
Here it all is.
Great, yes, enjoy reading, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, exciting. Thanks for watching, Elon, and happy reading, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.